Hi there. Welcome to the ninth in a series of videos about how to use Managebac effectively in your MYP class. This video is dedicated to understanding how to report a student's end-of-term progress. And just as important as assessment is to the MYP program, it's also very important to communicate a student's progress to the students and parents as a way for them to reflect and grow as MYP learners. Now, in the previous video, we created two classes, both of them sophomore physics classes for first and second period. We made a unit, we added tasks and students. We talked about students adding work, how to grade work, and looked at the files. Now, today I'm going to look at my first period class. Now, we're going to pretend it's the end of the term, and it's time for me to report my end-of-term grades. Now, what I've done is I have 3 students in this class, and I've got a couple assessments that I've done my first term. Now, in order to submit term grades, I'm going to go ahead and click on the Tasks button on the toolbar, and then over on the right-hand side, you'll see a nifty little link that says Submit Term Grades. We can go ahead and click on that. Now, once I get to this page, I want to make sure I'm reporting grades for the correct term. This is very important. This is going to save you a lot of time. In the top right-hand corner, I notice a little drop-down menu, and in this case, I want to be submitting my first term grades. Even though it is currently second term, I want to report first term grades, and so I select it and I can choose first term. Now, be very careful. Double check that you have the right term. I personally have spent a little bit of time having to re-put in grades because I messed this little bit up. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at John Doe. Once I've got my correct term selected, I've got my students and my MYP scores, and I'm going to enter in the end-of-term grades. Now, I want you to understand that the end-of-term grade is not an average. It's not an average of the MYP assessments they've done so far. The overall term grade is where your best judgment of where the student is at, based on the specific criteria, at the end of the term. They give you a little explanation here on the right-hand side that's sort of helpful. So I want to look at these grades. Let's go step by step. This is John Doe, and I'm going to look at his 4 criterion. Let's look at criterion A. His assessment score for this was a 5, and I think that's probably pretty accurate for John Doe, so I'm going to go ahead and give him a 5. Just simply click, and I'm done. It's already saved. For criterion B, I had 2 assessments in this term. One of them was a 7, while the other was a 2. Now, I'm thinking about how he performs in class, and, I think the 7 is a better judgment of, where he's at. His project where he got that 2, there were just a bunch of issues and a lot of things happening. He was absent for a few days. I think a 7, maybe a 6, but let's stick with the 7. Is probably an appropriate score at that point. Again, I'm using the assessments as a guide. They're not telling me the grades. For criteria C, I haven't yet done any assessments. Let's pretend that this assessment just wasn't covered in the first term. It's something that really we get to in the second term. Now, even though I haven't done an assessment on this, I have been able to see him do some work that relates in some way to this criterion. Maybe not an exact MYP assessment, but it's some good work. And so I think he's probably about a 5. Now, I don't have any MYP assessments to back me up on this. I certainly will by the second term. But in this case, we're just going to make a best guess estimate based on what you as the teacher have seen in class. For criterion D, on his assessment, he got a 5, but that was an assessment that was early in the year. And, I've seen a lot of progress from him in that area. And so, I think he's probably a little closer to a 6. Again, I am not a slave to the assessment grades. My final grades are whatever they might be. They're what I think he's performing at the end of the term, not when we took the assessment. Now, as soon as I put in all John's grades, they're all saved, and I can go ahead and move on to the next student. Now, as you can see, coming up with the appropriate levels is probably a lot trickier than actually entering them. Entering the grades is fairly simple. The whole point of coming up with a report of the student's achievement is to give them, their parents, and faculty an assessment of their current performance at the end of that term. If you look for John Doe, we've actually come up with an MYP final grade for the term. This is actually calculated based on a sum of all the scores given, and you can see this conversion at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. So I hope you are able now to enter end-of-term grades for all of your students. This is going to provide them effective feedback. It's going to help them to become a better learner.